Well, we did.
Yeah.
This is one of the most successful places in the world in terms of adoption. It's an excellent use case.
Yeah. We're involved. But
And adoption is going,
It's 2 seats
it's going
back.
exponential.
or a fees for $20.
There's 2 seats back here.
There's
There's a lion tamer stool here.
Hello, I think there's a stool right here.
Well, they'll still see me in the house.
Yeah. Oh.
All right, kids. It's Tuesday night. Happy Halloween. Yeah. I've got the scariest Bitcoin meetup of all time prepared for you tonight.
But first,
And I'm starting, I showed up dressed as a very sweaty boule tourist.
that's good.
Pretty scary.
Quite scary.
Pretty
yeah.
scary, right?
Wait, we got a shout out for you first.
What's that?
We got a shout out for Gary, everybody.
Okay.
Okay. We're all
Ready?
ears.
Here we go. I'd like to honor today in my rhyme a man who gives freely of his time, helping people understand crypto. It's a foreign language at first, don't you know? He's been hosting Bitcoin filters for some years, helping make those complex concepts clear. Instrumental in creating community. Facebook group Bitcoins in Bali. So everybody offer up a cheer. Oh man, Gary Flex is here.
Uh-oh. Wow, that was most unexpected. Well done, rapping professor.
Thank you.
The talent runs deep here in Ubud.
It's all you.
That was awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, guys. Well, that concludes our meeting for tonight. That's a hard to follow. You know, we're going to give it our best shot. What have we got going tonight? Well, we just had our first big conference in Bali, the Block Bali event, and we've even got the MC himself, Chika, here, right? Woo! Well done. Well done. It's a very cool thing. So we're going to go over a little bit of what happened at Block Bali. How many people went to Block Bali? All right. Okay, so hopefully you can share your opinions. We're going to talk about that a little bit. I think all in all, it was a good thing.
Yeah.
Good exposure. Okay, and then we're going to talk about Bitcoin legality. Bitcoin legality. We've recently had some news in Indonesia, a little bit of a bump in the road for Bitcoin adoption in Indonesia. And I wanted to talk about the larger issue of, you know, what is the role of government when it comes to blockchain technology and Bitcoin in particular, and what can we do to foster this technology while remaining in the lines when it comes to regulation? Because I think, well, there's a fine line to walk, and the world is trying to figure out what the right balance is. We even had someone from the police speak at the Block Bali conference, so it is definitely on the radar of regulators, and I want to see what you guys think. So I'm going to try and facilitate a little conversation around that. And then that is going to lead into this space that we find ourselves in, where the Bitcoin has forked once, forked twice. We're talking about another fork on the 16th of November. How is that all going to work? And, you know, what are we expecting to get out of Bitcoin and blockchain technologies, right? What does Bitcoin want to be? And are we going to get it? We still, it's a work in progress. And I think it's fair to think about exactly what we're all trying to do. The question, what is Bitcoin, is a notoriously difficult question to ask and answer, but we're going to give it a shot. Excuse me for just a sec. So we'll give it a shot. We've got 90 minutes. Let's go, guys. Let me share my screen. Really doesn't like it. One of the presenters had a ponytail on top of his head, so I figure there's definitely no hairstyle code. Uh-oh. All right. Bear with me for 1 second here, guys.
That would be great. Please stand by for a second.
All right. I think everybody should be seeing our screen up there. We got the Telegram group going. Willie's cracking jokes about my hair, so all's right with the world. All right. All right, guys. Let's start. Let's jump right in here. Let's start with Block Bali. This happened on Friday last week, and I think there were even some events that spilled over into Saturday, and we had a packed schedule. First of all, the room was packed. They sold out the event, 300 plus paid attendees, and they had a packed schedule when it came to. Hello, Lauren. Welcome, welcome. We had a packed speaker list, including that's our man Oscar Darmawan. You might recognize him from Bitcoin.co.id. There's our own Stephen DeMillionaire who kicked things off. There was also a presentation by Roberto. And the MC of the whole event was Chika, who's in the room. And you did an awesome job, by the way.
Yeah.
You told a very cool anecdote about was it the light bulb?
Yes.
And Thomas Edison. And
Yes.
I thought that was excellent. That was really cool. So again, I think almost everyone in the room, or a large percentage of the people in the room, attended the conference. So anybody care to chime in on your thoughts or what you think, or was it good? Was it bad? What did you like?
I'll chime in one thing.
Okay.
I thought there was a presentation by a member of the Indonesian National Police.
Yes. Where is that guy?
Who originally he was going to be talking about anti-terrorism, about trying to crack down on crypto being used for terrorism, but he shifted the topic of his speech, and I enjoyed his talk. I thought it was very impartial. He made it clear that he said, look, governments and you as like crypto users, buyers, etc., we're not on different sides. We're on the same side. We both want it to be a safe, basically crypto to be a safe world to deal in. So we're trying to only to crack down on the bad users, not the good users.
Mm-hmm.
And I also found it encouraging. Oscar Darmawan, CEO of Bitcoin.co.id, said basically, we're constantly in touch with him and other members, other regulators, and they feel like they're on the same side of the coin. They're not enemies. I found that encouraging, actually, because I was a little bit concerned, when BitByR, et cetera, was forbidden to accept Bitcoin as payment. I thought, does that bode poorly for Bitcoin.co.id? And I was comforted a bit to know that, they're all in good contact with each other, regulators, Oscar, et cetera. That eased my fears a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that was a long one.
Well, one of the things that I know in talking with Oscar and also some of the Indonesian folks that have shown up at these meetings have said that there is an element of scam in Indonesia, where there's people that are take advantage of the momentum, all of the news. Obviously, Bitcoin is an international news story, and there's lots of positive press about Bitcoin. And then there are lots of scammers that show up with get-rich-quick schemes. And it would be nice if the regulators were able to focus on that and not hinder the normal, regular, organic adoption of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to that. I mean, if we follow that analogy of the bureaucrats only wanting to hamper the activities of the bad actors, well, look at the recent implementations of the rules they've just set down. So is Kismet, where we used to get our dinner afterwards, are they a bad actor? Is Ubud, that hosts us and used to accept payments, are they a bad actor? Is every one of us here in this room that used to buy our electricity or phone credit through those means of exchange, are we all bad actors? So it's all well and nice to be saying all this stuff. We're going to protect you. We're going to weed out the bad actors. But let's look at actually the actions that they've taken. They haven't weeded out the bad actors. They've weeded out everyone, and they've granted a monopoly to the exchange to be the only actor that is able to act as a means of exchange in and out of rupiah to cryptocurrency.
Perhaps it's an overstep, in your opinion.
Well, I mean, just there's a disparity between the rhetoric and the action.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I was going to bring this up later, but maybe it makes sense to talk about it now. Are there other reasons that regulators and governments would want to stifle the adoption of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies besides the things that they purport to want to help us with?
I'll see a parallel here with real estate market, because a few months ago, Indonesia introduced that real estate is only allowed to be sold, advertised, and sold in rupiah, as before that it was all in US dollars. So my theory on this is that they want to, and it's the same for Bitcoin in this case. I think they just want to keep the velocity of rupiah going, to keep the value of the currency high. That is, in my eyes, is the number one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they use words as, we protect you, or bad guys. Wording, but it's the velocity of money is a very, very important factor, and that's exactly what they're doing with allowing only, rupiah transactions for properties, and, being unable to pay for in Bitcoin, so you need to use rupiah.
Right. I agree. If economic activity is able to sidestep the rupiah, that means that there's less demand for rupiah on the global market, and the value of the rupiah goes down vis-a-vis other currencies. So that they are, an element of this is protecting the value of the rupiah.
There's another piece.
Yeah.
What you cannot track, you cannot tax.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very significant piece, I think, in all cultures that are wanting regulatory control of cryptocurrency. And we've been focused on the war on cash for some time in this room. It's very similar. Something with the fungibility, of cryptocurrency is not welcome. And my favorite slide of his presentation was kind of the question of, is crypto a currency? Is it an asset? Is it a commodity? And the answer is yes. There's a big word, taxation, down at the bottom. And I was like, okay, know where you're coming from.
Yeah, it seems like all of those things are a bit of a metaphor for, there are existing things that we all understand, and it's a metaphor for this new thing that we really don't have a name for, and they try to say it's a currency, they try to say it's a commodity, they try and say it's an asset, and all of that is
whatever it needs to be regulated.
Yeah, and from his standpoint, certainly.
It's whatever we turn it into as a community, as a community of users, developers, miners, all participants. It still is up for grabs on what we turn this thing into, although it's a lot more it's a lot less malleable than what it was 4 years ago, when all the options and opportunities were open. But if we talk about fungibility, and how do we achieve fungibility, if we were all using Bitcoin to interact with one another, if we were all paying for our rent, our phone, our transportation, our settlements between one another's, if we were using it as a means of exchange, that's when fungibility really starts to come in, because then it's not tracked. When you go back to an exchange in order to get in and out of the cryptocurrency, and those exchanges are attached to identity, then you no longer have fungibility. So fungibility is a function of means of exchange, if everyone's using it. And that's kind of what I saw as the opportunity 4 years ago. If it could really bootstrap, if everyone could really get on it before regulatory stuff caught up to it, then maybe it would have a chance of being a means of exchange. And the underlying pseudo anonymity of the Bitcoin protocol wouldn't be a problem, just because it'd just be, it'll all be out in the wild and no one would be touching the exchanges. Exchanges are becoming what the banks used to be. Yeah. None of the currencies have scaled or scaled properly. We're seeing massive blockchain proliferation. Everyone launching a different blockchain. Blockchains can't talk to one another, so everyone has to go through the exchanges in order to switch between chains and do anything. And there goes your fungibility.
So we're going to talk about that as a topic tonight, and I want to just round things out with the conference. And just to segue a little bit, we had these guys from Pundi X. Did anyone stop by the Pundi X booth? They also gave a presentation.
Cool. Yeah.
Indonesian company. What is their product?
Malaysia.
Malaysia.
Oh, it's a Malaysian company.
Pre-sale also, and
Okay.
I have the video that I sent to my group. I have 60 Indonesian there. I built in 1 month ago. I shared it already. If you want to see it later, I can send the video.
Okay.
Really good. You can buy.
Yeah. It was an impressive presentation.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, did they move to Malaysia after the conference? Because Indonesia just gave us the news that you weren't able to make payments with Bitcoin.
Oh, yeah.
This is one of the things that they enable. So obviously Indonesia is no longer going to be a big market for them.
Temporarily.
Yeah, at least temporarily. And I mean, it's interesting because they had a whole presentation. He's showing this really slick technology, and it's, asterisk, you can't use this, to everybody in the room. It's a firsthand example of how the regulations stifle innovation and shut down an entire business for an entire country because somebody says so. What else? What else? Other memorable moments? Other things that you like? Anybody see this guy from Jorg Molt?
The showstopper.
Did he come on just after lunch? Because I felt like I was kind of dozing off a little bit. I was watching all these presentations, and I was like a little bit sleepy. And then he shows up like a tornado and starts bad mouthing every other vendor that's at the conference. He's like, "This is BS. These guys don't know what they're talking about."
Lies.
And I was like, "Holy smokes!"
Multiple times.
Any idea how this guy, what his background is, or?
I didn't vet him, so I know Southwest did. And honestly, I think he was there because he was with the Satoshi School, and he had a cache of Bitcoin that was far bigger than anybody else's, and he wanted to speak, so he was.
So the first thing this guy said was, "I have 250,000 Bitcoin." That was like one of the first things he said. And basically, that means I have FU Bitcoin, and I can just say these guys suck, and these guys are terrible.
I can say anything I want.
And by the way, if you have any projects that you think are going to change the world, we'll fund you for free. I believe he said that.
Is that not the same thing that Trump said when he started? I'm so rich you can't buy me. I'm gonna do the right thing. That's what Trump said.
Are you saying you don't like this Trump world that we find ourselves in?
Why are you here? Why did you leave Trump's America?
He left before Trump.
He
left Obama's America.
This is true. Satoshi School.
Satoshi School. I don't know. Does somebody know more about Satoshi School than I do?
Yeah, for the basic, they're teaching about blockchain, and then soft fork, hard fork, what is it, and the basic, and then they have the advanced class is $6,000. One Bitcoin is crazy, and you can be a teacher after that. I don't know why he didn't write it. It's crazy.
It's a 5-day. It's like a 5-day course for $6,000. You become a trainer, a teacher.
Can I just
Basically,
say,
just teaching about Bitcoin, what it is, what the technology is.
And
I
he's like a
looked at the list of
Bitcoin
things.
maximalist.
I looked at the list of things that he teaches in like the first level class, and I was like, I think I learned all of that in the first 2 of these meetings that I attended. So thank you. You're kicking him like way out of.
And my charge is 250,000 Bitcoin.
Bless you. I'll pay your transfer.
Checks in the mail.
I'll hack him. Yeah.
But my perception of the entire Block Bali conference was that we're still in the nascent stages of this movement, and it's still the Wild West, where a lot of folks like York Molt and a few others to sell their wares, to be salespeople for product, which is something that Sarfraz explicitly said was not permissible. So he asked for everyone's speeches beforehand, but most people gave him the speech just hours before they came on. So there was no way to really vet what they were going to say. There was one guy who was talking about the pros and cons of IOTA, Monero, and Zcash, and Dash, and he is a fund manager and a miner. He was with Genesis Mining, and he gave a good speech, talked about pros and cons of some of the coins, but essentially he's saying, why don't you join me and let me handle your portfolio? He's a portfolio manager.
Yes.
And that is self-serving. If
Yes.
they're there for a conference, it's got to be information-based. It's got to be more giving than expected.
Why should they come across from different countries, pay money in order to give a free lesson? Wouldn't it be a bit naive to expect them to come all this way? They represent companies, to not treat it like a trade show that it basically is.
Well, there is another model where you find experts in the field, and everybody paid like 750,000, $1 million, and there could be a segment of that budget that pays experts to come and give a speech about the things that they are experts in.
Was that the model?
And if you no,
they weren't paid.
I don't believe so. Were the speakers paid, or any of the speakers paid?
It was like a sales expo. They knew to the crypto space.
Oh, they paid to come. Okay, so right, so yeah, I think that set of incentives would probably skew it more towards people giving a commercial for their project than sharing. Well, and this was a first iteration. It could be a lessons learned. I think it'd be interesting to go back and say, if we had 300 people and they all paid X, could we get Andreas to come, or could we get Tour de Mester, or would Willy Woo come?
Wait there, Will.
My budget's not too astronomical either.
Manu, get Manu for well, we'll have to negotiate.
250,000 satoshis.
I just want to add to one thing though. Also, is like the audience. Like, are they beginners or are they advanced? And what kind of content do you curate to satisfy that audience? Because some people are really bored and some people are really confused, and so that's a big discrepancy. So how do you handle that in conferences, or even sometimes in this room, right? Like, there's some level of like background studying and things like that to get people to a level, or
that make it more interesting. Yeah.
Some people are struggling with English. I sat near a couple of Indonesian tables, and after a few hours of non-stop English, the Indonesian tables were just playing on their phones.
And talking.
I felt for them too.
I struggled keeping up with English.
Yeah, because when they've got a strong accent too, like you have to really concentrate for some of those. I was thinking, wow, if we weren't an English speaker for some of those, it would be really hard.
But it was a good first effort. It was good to gauge the interest that's out there, and if we want to do this every year, I think next year could be better based on what we our own assessment of what's happening, and I don't think it was a bad thing. I think it was good.
Bali on the map, and he is planning on making it an annual event, so this will happen.
Good.
Could it be deconflicted with
All right.
Yes. Well, they probably schedule it in a different week.
All right, guys, let's move on a little bit. And I think this is gonna segue really nicely, because we've already started talking about this, and that is, I wanted to facilitate a discussion around what is the nature of government and how is government supposed to help us. What is the role of government in our lives? And these days, with all the terrorism and you'll see it over and over again. Politicians will say that the number one thing the government needs to do is keep our citizens safe, right? So, and actually, this is a departure, at least for the United States. The founding fathers did not consider that the most important thing. The most important thing for the founding fathers of the United States was to preserve the freedom of the people. They had just come out from under the tyranny of the British Empire, and they prioritized freedom above all else, and we've kind of morphed into something different, I think. And most people, I think, would say that I mean, if you did a poll of the United States, I think people do think that the government is supposed to keep us safe. And the question I have for you is, at what cost, or how do they strike a balance? And I thought it'd be interesting to think about something different, just for the sake of a mental exercise, here is a list of motor vehicle deaths in the U.S. by year. And you can see that in 2016, 37,461 people died from car accidents in 2016 alone. By the way, that's like an order of magnitude more than the people that died in 9/11. So it is a significant number of people that are dying from cars. However, the government decides that we're not going to ban cars, right? Cars are still legal. We still all use cars. We go from point A to point B. If government needs to keep us safe, well, they're letting 37,000 people die. How do they strike that balance? How do they decide? You know, the other thing is a lot of people die from drinking and driving, and alcohol is related to many deaths and accidents, and woe, but they don't ban alcohol, and they don't require a breathalyzer in every car before you start the car. So obviously, we will abide some danger. It's okay for a certain number of people to die. And how do we strike that balance? How do we decide?
Follow the money.
Who lobbies the hardest?
Who lobbies the hardest?
Follow the money.
Yes, cars bring in a lot of money. The automotive industry brings in a lot of money.
Lobby.
You think it's merely it's an economic decision? Yeah. Well, okay. So if we keep that lens on and move over to cryptocurrencies, the Indonesian government has said we're no longer able to pay for things using Bitcoin. Is it a matter of economics in this case?
Yes.
It is. Economics for whom? Who are the interested parties here, and who's being protected?
Yeah, central bank.
Yeah, central bank, the Indonesian people, the Indonesian state. I think we established earlier that perhaps there is an element of protecting the citizens.
Yeah, because
Right. So an Indonesian, an everyday Indonesian could say, yeah, I don't want Bitcoin to show up because I believe in Indonesia and I want Indonesia to have a strong currency, and I think it's good that we're not allowing Bitcoin to show up.
It's definitely a good point, but I mean, like in terms of ratio between the amount of people that are going to trade in Bitcoin compared to the 300 plus million people that are here, like what's the actual significant impact that Bitcoin would have on 13,450 rupees to $1 today?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a very good argument, it's very valid. The reality of that today, for the next 5 years, even how big is the impact of Bitcoin?
Right. Well,
the point I think is only valid if the Central Bank of Indonesia is owned by the state of Indonesia. I don't know particularly about the Indonesian central banks, but other central banks are not state-owned, really.
Yeah.
So the point of being a national currency is absolutely fake, because all the profits get sucked out of the country. So this guy who says, I want my Indonesian rupiah to be a national currency, well, this only works. I only can remember one guy who did this, and his name was out of something.
Yes.
He managed to throw out the central banks and create his own currencies, and Kennedy tried that too. But,
yes.
So this gets
here, but,
He was about to try that, and he got killed.
Well, this gets to the heart of the matter, because what power does a central bank have when they have the ability to create the money for the country? And how dear is that power to do that?
Congress gave that power away in 1913. Federal Reserve.
Right. The model was established in the United States in 1913 when the Federal Reserve was established. Not a government agency, although the name would make you think otherwise, but a real example. And it's my understanding that most central banks around the world are working on this model, where it's a quasi-government agency. They definitely work quite closely with the political entities within that country, also with the big businesses and the monopolies that happen to exist in a certain country. And if you're working with that model, then you've got all this power to create money. New money is worth more when it's first created than later when it has trickled out into the economy and has diluted the value of all other currencies. And could you say to that Indonesian who said Bitcoin is bad, well, what if you had sold your goods for Bitcoin in 2014 versus selling your goods for rupiah? You know, how best to preserve the value of what you've sold?
It doesn't matter because the exchange was voluntary. Nobody coerced you into using Bitcoins. You made your decisions to set your goods in Bitcoins or any currency you want. Like Hayek said, there should be several competing currencies in the economy.
Right.
And good money will drive out the bad money.
Right. I would agree. Well, and I think that we should be free to exchange, but in this case, Indonesia is saying you two people who want to cooperate, you're not allowed to cooperate using Bitcoin. That is not allowed.
That's right. That's coercion.
That's what they're saying, basically.
Yeah.
They're saying
Yeah.
And the reason they give is, well, we're keeping you safe, or we're preserving the integrity of Indonesia.
Yes.
Ultimately,
But what
the
they're
reason is that in countries like Indonesia, the government is always afraid because of its, stage of development. That at one point or another, you're going to have a bank run, you're going to have people wanting to get out of the Indonesian rupiah. And so governments make these kind of statements because of the stability that they want to have. Right now, in Indonesia, things are looking good, but, you look back in the past 20 years, it's not always been like that. And especially in countries like that, all over Asia, you might have the argument that you say, look, we have to somehow have the power to shield ourselves against currency speculation, dumping Indonesian rupiah and having a real effect on the economy, like right now in China, right? Past 2 years, you've seen how China has clamped down on its control over its currency, and it's actually saved its economy of pressure that would have come from the United States, from the traders at the east coast of the United States. So there's a different argument here in Indonesia than that is made in the US or in Europe by Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. Well, central banks and the banking regime depends on fractional reserve banking. And when the banks are creating money by creating loans, if all depositors want to go get their money at the same time, that's called a run on the bank. And if you don't have the ability to create money, right? If you can't be the lender of last resort, then that system falls apart, right? And in years past, they used the gold standard to be a real check on banks so that they couldn't create so much money that everything inflated away through hyperinflation. But we no longer have that real thing to anchor our currencies against. And therefore, we need central banks that can create money at will, because they need to be the lender of last resort. And if you've got central bank currencies that are constantly devaluing over time, and something like Bitcoin exists, and if you believe in Gresham's law that good money pushes out bad money, does that mean Bitcoin or something like it will eventually supplant these currencies unless there is a hostile stance, unless they declare Bitcoin is not safe, or you may not use Bitcoin?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Could that be part of the reason why they're saying no to Bitcoin?
And there's another bit back to the point from before, which is, when they divorced the US dollar from the gold standard, what was it secured by? What did it become secured by? The full faith and credit of the United States Treasury, right? Which means what? No, it means taxes. It goes back to the people. So if you can't collect the taxes, you can't continue to do all of this quantitative easing. It depends on the people being on the treadmill and paying their taxes, and that requires regulation and monitoring. Of course, they don't want people to escape that.
So is there going to come a time when governments are going to clamp down and just declare these things illegal because these levers of power are going to go away?
They own them, which is what I believe we're seeing right now as an attempt at that.
Okay, so
And
remember,
even if you can't own the thing, you might, as Manu pointed out, own the on-ramps. And that's all you need. You need to take a toll. People can't go freely on that road. It's effectively the same thing.
Control the banks.
Yeah. You control, yeah. You just control the.
well, let's take a look at what's going on around the world. Of course, Indonesia has said no, but well, according to this guy, China's no and Indonesia's no is Japan's yes.
Big time, yes.
And they are taking off like crazy. And Japan is a big player on the world stage. I mean, they're for many years, I don't know if it's still true, they were the third largest economy in the world. And they're also a largely cash-based society. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but people will buy cars, houses, they'll show up with suitcases full of money. Is that the Halloween parade? Anyway, let's see what's going on here. Japan has established itself as the safe haven of all legitimate cryptocurrencies and cryptocurrency exchanges. Japan is too strategically important for the U.S. to browbeat over something as small in scale as cryptos. Furthermore, Japan is long past the point where it will automatically comply with every self-destructive demand of the American imperial project. So I think geopolitically what's going on right now is you've got China, Russia, as the focus of one power structure, and then you've got the United States and everything else. And countries like Indonesia are probably stuck in the middle a little bit. And countries like Japan, who have been playing nice with the United States for a long time and devaluing their currency and everything else that the United States has asked them to do, I mean, they're in trouble. Japan is in a real bind from a monetary standpoint. They've got, I think their debt is 200% of GDP, so they will never pay off their debt. And they're a lot of their monetary policies, I know, were coordinated with the U.S. Federal Reserve as kind of a global system that they were trying to facilitate. But at this point, I think Japan is wondering where their loyalties should lie. And perhaps they see the writing on the wall with crypto. I mean, they seem to be going in whole hog. And, I don't know for sure, but this could be the beginning of nation states and sovereign wealth funds and big geopolitical players getting involved with crypto. And it remains to be seen if Japan truly does get a huge benefit from being crypto friendly, then there could be a real stampede from other countries to follow suit.
What's the regulatory situation in Japan?
Well, it's very dovish, is my understanding.
So
I mean,
they're letting people just stay. They're not requiring KYC and all this stuff, or can you only trade on exchanges? Can you trade independently?
Well, they're making it very easy to open exchanges. In fact, I think dozens have opened. There was an article
so
on.
They can still control it. Is the point?
There was an article on in
Zero
Zero Hedge.
I found the money changer for Bitcoin, so I can send the exchanger there the Bitcoin and I get the yen. And I found a mall, one big mall. You can spend your Bitcoin there, and you get
At the whole mall?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, I follow it.
The airports now as well.
Oh yeah, in Tokyo.
Did they do an ID check on you when you used
No, and you get
Very nice.
8% tax free, so you don't need to pay tax if you pay with Bitcoin.
Oh wow.
Very friendly.
That's friendly.
Yeah.
Maybe we should crowdsource some Indonesian government officials to go to a trip to Japan.
Gary, in that regard, how do you see as you said, the governments want to control the on and off ramps, which makes sense for taxation. But what about the decentralized exchanges with cash on and off ramps? Isn't that the future to, go around those issues?
Well, I mean, ideally, we live in a world where there's peer-to-peer exchange. There is no off-ramp and on-ramp. I mean, on-ramp and off-ramp to what if everybody's using crypto?
Well, in the transition time, we're using fiat.
Right. In the transition time, yes.
Right now, we use fiat to deploy Bitcoin.
Right, and I think they want to push us to these centralized mechanisms that can be taxed and controlled and regulated.
Yeah, wouldn't a decentralized exchange with cash, with fiat on and off ramping solve all the problems of, not being taxable.
I don't know. I mean, ideally, I mean, I have this, maybe I'm naive, but I have this vision that a country could could consist of a population that wants to pay their taxes because the country stands for something they want to contribute to. Like, how's that for a concept? And I think we're a little ways away. But I mean, imagine if you had a world where we were using cryptocurrency, so it's sound money, and any nation state or business has to get ahead, not based on monetary policy or not based on whether or not they've devalued their currency or the currency wars are in their favor or not, but whether they've produced a good more efficiently than another country, or they've worked harder, or they've been more industrious, and they've created more actual wealth as denominated by a world currency, or at least a set of currencies where people know the rules. And then they can go to their population and they not through using the gun and not through taxation, which is a hidden tax, but go to the population and say, this is what we want to do with the money. And by the way, because it's crypto, you can see exactly how we're spending all of this money. I mean, imagine that world. I mean, I've been, it works on a small scale. I've been to little villages in Vanuatu where the tax collect, like they need something and they just go door to door and they're like, we need to build a road. Everybody's got to chip in, what do you got? And they chip in. Some of them chip in money, but there's not a lot of money. So some of them say, we'll go out and like with a shovel and we'll get involved. But there was never a, we're going to force the money out of you. It was tied to the things that are going to benefit the common interest. Right.
Yeah, it happens here
so.
as well.
It does. Yes.
Yeah, they're tearing up all these roads around Ubud, and the bandar will come by and say, hey, we're trying to pay for this road. Everybody's chipping in. You need to give us a couple mil. And I think that's great. I pay a couple mil, I get a cobblestone street, walk street. Like, that sounds awesome. And we've lost that connection where really we perceive the government as showing up with a gun and saying, you can't invent something that's going to keep us from forcing you to pay taxes. Like, isn't that kind of a messed up thing? Like,
which we agree to for the sake of safety.
And they're usual taxes.
Yeah.
So that's a law.
You surrender your rights and give up your autonomy in order to be safe. So the government.
You need Second
safe.
Amendment in Ubud. You need Second Amendment.
All right. Anyway, it's something to think about. Let's see, what is Willie saying? That only happens when the society size is small, where there's a social contract that is dominant, not in large sizes and not in large geographic regions. So that's actually a good point. And I find myself wondering this, and I put the question to the group: what is the perfect atomic size, like political atom? Is it a family? Is it a banjar? Is it a nation state? Do we need one world government? Like, what is the perfect unit size for a political entity?
There's a name for it.
There's a name for it and a number for it.
It's about 150.
The Dunbar
It's
number?
150.
It's 150 people. It's a
Wouldn't it
Dunbar
depend
number.
on what you sort of, like, let's say each little community has coconuts, and there's a lot of coconut trees, and some communities don't have anything at all. And some communities have gold, and some communities have a lot of oil, and it will depend on the resources and what they need to produce to keep the rest of the system going.
Mhm.
Wouldn't it be sort of in relationship to that?
Yeah, I think that's something to think about. Some countries are going to have oil, other countries are going to have lumber, other countries are going to have skills that others don't. And just like individual people have individual skill sets, it'd be nice if they could trade, and there could be an economy for those things. I don't know, it's interesting. On a global basis, we're seeing kind of a contraction in terms of the political atom. You've got Scotland that wants to become independent. I was just in Hawaii. They wanted to be independent. Obviously, we've got Brexit and now Catalonia. Why is this happening? Is it because people find themselves in a political milieu where they feel like they have no say? Like they got no power. These people are showing up and telling them what they can stuff their pillows with.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't.
200 lines of 2,200 lines of regulations on pillows and bed sheets.
Yes.
That's
Well,
standard.
Oh my
you know,
God.
Union.
what, they do have nice sheets in Europe, though. I like those sheets. They're nice.
But Will
Um,
has a great point, because when the U.S. began, that whole system was developed for 13 colonies, right? They couldn't imagine a country of
Yeah.
300 plus
I
million
think there are only
people.
3 million people in the United States
So
when.
scaling is as significant a question now as it was then. So even if the Dunbar number were true, how do we set up the connective tissue, right, between these modules, whatever size they are? That's where I think our underlying technology of the blockchain has a huge amount of promise. Because
Right.
if I'm a citizen and I want to pay for that road project, right, not only can I pay for it, I can see where my money went.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's
and
pretty
as
powerful.
it's going on the project, and so can all my neighbors. That is so cool. That could change everything in my
Yes. Blockchain and private militia.
And transparency. And the other part is, I don't think is, I can't get my head around. I'm highly suspicious of a fixed number, like this is the ideal number for a community across oil, coconut, whatever. I think a lot of it must have to do with the communication mechanisms and the visibility. Like if you know how everybody's doing in your village, you have a sense of whose grandmother's in trouble and who's suffering over here and how to spread the resources around, and the sense of responsibility. If you're in the same village or the same number of people, but you had a bad communication, maybe some communication breakdown or some gaps between the houses and you couldn't see over there, then you wouldn't have the same connectivity in that village.
Mhm.
So I think the tools that we come up with that make things visible, like, how is to have everybody in this room actually feel connected? That's where I think our technology can contribute.
Yeah, I think that we find ourselves in a new technology environment that human beings haven't existed in before. And we're like the pioneers. Like we've got these new tools at our disposal. And how is it going to work? It's up to us to define these things. And, we've got our own ideas. Other incumbent powers have their ideas. And something's going to happen. we've got a front row seat. And it's fun to consider these questions because it's all changing. I mean, everything's changing. And it's nice to get together with people that are paying attention and thinking about these things.
I think it really comes down to reputation. In a small scale social unit village, reputations scales. So, and this is why we can observe gift economies in indigenous groups, is because everyone remembers what everyone else has done. So your good actions toward others have a lasting, if you like, give you a lasting equity in
social currency.
Social currency, yeah. But as soon if you switch over to go across to the next village, all that's gone.
No value.
That's right. So
No visibility.
yeah, that's why. So if we can build scalable reputation systems, we can have a good chance of reversing those behaviors. Yeah.
Well, money was supposed to provide that for us, right? I mean, it's corrupt, and that's what we're trying to fix with cryptocurrencies. But if I show up in Indonesia with my bag of dollars and I want an Indonesian person to make me a sandwich for my lunch, I hand them those bills, and presumably I've done something comparable to that sandwich myself.
You provided
for somebody. Like it's like portable favors. Like presumably I've made a sandwich for somebody else, or dug a ditch, or taught something. I've done something valuable for somebody else, and this person who's going to make my lunch is honoring that deal, right? They're saying, okay, I'll make you a sandwich because obviously you've done something good for somebody else, and we'll make the world go around because we're going to agree to do this. But because I come from a country that owns the world's reserve currency, and because I'm a part of the rich class that can avoid inflation by owning a home, having a stock portfolio, all these things, that means that even though they're doing something real, like making a sandwich, I may or may not have done something real at all to earn that sandwich. And that's kind of a bad state of affairs. I mean, human beings should be on a level playing field, and money should or could represent that level playing field so that we can all cooperate better. And, people don't pay attention to the way the world monetary system works. And it's a good thing that people are in good faith cooperating and, doing these things. But I just think I wonder what the way the world would be if it was really a level playing field and everybody who is doing something for somebody else gets something of equal value in kind. We don't live in that world.
Don't go into communism, please.
Not communism, just fair money.
Just sound money. Yeah.
Just sound money. Yeah.
Distributed money creation function.
No, I agree, but don't go too far.
Yeah, I'm not a communist. I think communism. I don't think.
Started saying equally, you distribute, you do something, and you're like that's a communist thing.
No, I'm not talking about just distributing.
What makes it communistic is when some central party is distributing.
Yeah.
Once you have a central party with a mandate to distribute things evenly, that central party always becomes corrupt. Yeah. So that's the failing of socialism. If you're talking about cryptocurrency, enabling people to create their own money. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey Gary, something I didn't understand. If I want to be able to buy stuff with cryptocurrency, but when we're talking about the government's motivation for banning it here in Indonesia, and we went through a number of reasons, I'm just trying to think how it's different from banning if people came here and wanted to use American dollars or their currency of choice to buy stuff at Kismet. We're not allowed to use American or Australian or New Zealand or Russian money at Kismet. How is that different from, not allowing Bitcoin? Is there any difference in that? Or are they just being consistent?
Well, I mean, I think that they don't allow other currencies to be used. However, they do allow Visa MasterCard to operate. And when I swipe my card at Kismet, the owner gets rupiah, but I pay my credit card bill in dollars.
And that's not illegal.
And that's not illegal. So, in my opinion, it's not a consistent policy.
No, but the velocity of money because you circulate rupiah, That's completely congruent.
Yeah, I believe so too.
No, he's saying the credit card's okay, but the Bitcoin's different.
In the context of Bitcoin, I also think there is no new law has been put in place or anything. It's an super old existing law that has been
reinterpreted
with real estate about 6 months ago, for serious.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're just saying the same thing for Bitcoin. Yes, they would say the same thing for any other currency, US dollar. So I see it as a problem, but I don't see it as a hardcore stance against Bitcoin. It's just, hey, they don't know what the fuck they want to do with this thing. So the best they can do right now is this is our old laws, and we just make sure that you guys understand this is also valid for Bitcoin. That's how I see it.
Because they're not shutting down exchanges.
They're not clamping down anything until they figure out where they're going to stand.
No, but it's very clear they are very afraid of the volatility that they have in these countries, and actually money flows that go in and out, they have to have control. That's why they ban the dollars or any other currency, so they have to control that when money flushes, that it doesn't upend their economies. They're still very small in the global scheme, so that the motivation for Indonesia to say no to Bitcoin is a totally different argument than you meet over in the US, where they obviously have a debt problem, debasing problem, and people are sick of the US dollar and the euro. It's a completely different set of circumstance. They know exactly what they're doing. They want to keep the control of their sovereign currency. And Bitcoin is just the latest threat to that. It's an opening when things get unstable. It's an opening for people to get out. They don't want that.
Do you think rupiah doesn't have a debasement problem? That it's not being printed like crazy as well?
It does. Well, if you look at the economic development, inflation has been coming down, so that would have alleviated a lot of that perpetual deflation of the rupiah that we've seen over the past 20 years. So right now inflation is at 4%, which is quite low.
That's the government official metric.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, somebody has to measure it, and inflation actually is not what you measure in the consumer price index. Inflation is how you expand your monetary system.
Depends if you're using a Keynesian or an Austrian definition of inflation.
Yeah, well, the real inflation starts at the monetary base.
Yeah, the supply of money in the system. That would be your Austrian.
Because right now, you know, the U.S. chooses to say there's no inflation, but the stock markets keep going up. Is that not inflation? So they have bubbles here and no bubbles there, and they choose to look at where there's no bubbles so they can keep forcing money into the system to somehow get the economy going, which doesn't happen. And you know, that's the origin of the Bitcoin, that this attitude towards currency and having it, you know, do with the currency what I want and disenfranchise the people. And that is what is happening in the US and Europe. But here, it's simply a fear of, you know, things are unstable and people might get afraid that the rupiah might devalue again, and we have to have some sort of control.
What about like places like Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong? It seems to be like opening their doors like wide open for it, and maybe even catching some of the people that have been affected by the decisions made in China, for example. And they're like, oh, why don't you come here and do your business? And like they're getting a piece of the pie. Are they not scared that the similar things would happen to their currency?
In monetary terms, Japan has always been a bit enigmatic to me. You know, insular state. Look at the way they have for 20 years, they have not expanded their monetary base, and all of a sudden in 2012, out of the blue, they do the same thing that the US and Europe have been doing, only supercharged. I mean, the Japanese, it's very hard to read where they're from and what they're actually thinking in terms of Bitcoin or anything. Bitcoin is so very small still that they're really afraid of anything happening. It's an open economy, it's an open financial system. The yen is a huge currency compared to Bitcoin, so they must be much less afraid of it than Indonesia or China.
Well, let's see what's going on in other parts of the world. We've got Singapore that's saying we're not going to regulate cryptocurrencies. You've got Australia saying regulating blockchain protocols unlikely to be effective. You know, obviously we've already talked about Japan, and
That's honest.
and
What about Europe?
What about Europe? Well, I've got a where is it? Legality of Bitcoin by country and territory here. What country are you interested in?
Belgium.
Germany?
Belgium.
Belgium.
Yeah, exactly. It will be you have EU up there, so maybe it's just a more.
The Minister of Finance indicated that government intervention with regard to the Bitcoin system does not appear necessary at the present time.
All right. What about the EU?
It's pretty chill.
The EU would be more EU.
But this is Wikipedia, and look at what they have to say about Indonesia. According to Wikipedia, currently Bank Indonesia does not have detailed policies of regulating or banning Bitcoin usage. So, anybody want to like be the first person to update the Wikipedia page? Be my guest.
Well, actually, that's an interesting word usage because there's no problem with trading. There's just a problem with spending.
Right. Yeah.
Right, which could be construed as usage, I guess. Yeah.
And I saw you had an article about Singapore. Singapore is actually using it as a means of exchange, taxing it with GST, goods and services tax. But then if you buy it and hold it for long term, there's no capital gains tax. So they're actually like hitting it on two different levels.
That's interesting.
I don't know how they're going to monitor that or implement it, but that's
Well, and you know, Singapore is a nation state. Presumably, that's a smaller political atom than Indonesia, and maybe they can think about it and move more quickly, more specifically. I don't know.
Australia at one time was adding a GST to the purchase of Bitcoin, and then if you buy goods with Bitcoin, you're getting paying GST again, so you're getting double tax. Is that still?
That used to be the case in Australia, but I think that has changed.
They just removed it like 2 weeks ago.
Oh.
To be fair, Singapore does not travel gains tax on me.
So here's a little wrinkle for you guys. Bitcoin is perfectly legal in the United States, right? However, in my home state of Michigan, some poor Bitcoin trader has run afoul of money transmitter license rules and laws. So this guy, this guy's name is Salt and Pepper or something on local Bitcoins, has been indicted by the Department of Homeland Security in the United States. Here's the United States District Court, United States against, what's this guy's name? It's not Salt and Pepper. Anyway, this guy from the Department of Homeland Security has done a sting operation on this guy who, I mean, I read this whole thing. They talk about like what his minivan looks like, and it's very detailed about who this guy is. It's just some Joe Schmo who's got an account on local Bitcoins, who's meeting people at the local Tim Hortons and trading Bitcoin. It's something that I've seen many people do in many places, just over-the-counter trading. Hey, you know, I need some roops for some Bitcoin. Can you hook me up? And apparently, if you do this in Michigan, you can run afoul of what they call, well, operating a business without a money transmitter license. And by the way, a money transmitter license costs, I think, hundreds of thousands of dollars just to apply for, and you need full-time employees to make sure you're in compliance, and it's an incredibly onerous bar to to jump over in order to trade Bitcoin at Tim Hortons.
It's a classic US policy, though, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a classic U.S. policy that keeps people out of the banking industry, right? It's rules and regulations that keep people from opening their own banks and doing their own banking and cooperating. I think there was some guy did a reality show. It was called The Bank of Dave or something. And he's like, I'm going to open a bank. And then he cameras followed him around. And he was trying to meet with people and bumping up against all of the impediments that stop people from opening a bank. And it's really well done. But anyway, this is one of the benefits of living outside of the United States. I don't think there's any danger. I don't feel like there's a danger of someone busting any of us for doing a little Bitcoin trading around the edges. But this is the Department of Homeland Security keeping us safe by staking out the Tim Hortons. It's good because they can get their donuts and they can stake them out at the same time. This is recently, yeah. When was this story?
25th October.
Yeah, October. Yes.
He probably took all of his Bitcoins. And that's the most
No, you can't meet with people and organise a trade and it sits outside regulation. You need a license in order to facilitate that particular transaction.
So you don't meet people, and you just go into wallet trading this for that?
Yeah, that's illegal.
That's illegal?
You need a license to do it.
But Bitcoin is legal. How does that work? Like what trading money from money
That's
is
really
not
spread.
legal.
Correct.
It doesn't seem consistent.
No, it's not that it's not legal. It's not legal without a license.
Yeah, but with hundreds of thousands.
You just need a license. That's all.
Sharon does not know about.
I don't know what the problem is. This guy should have just gotten a money transfer license.
It's legal if you sit on an exchange. You got a bit of this, bit of that. You actually want to trade it directly with people that are like.
But for an exchange,
Oh yeah,
Because they
when
can
you're
track it.
plugging your
Local
passport and all
Bitcoins is an
that stuff,
exchange.
and
They can talk to
well,
you.
you get it. It's all about identity. They want to tie identity.
Or lack thereof.
Okay, so we've got a few minutes left, folks, and if you remember, I was going to try and talk about the state of Bitcoin, right? And we find ourselves at a crossroads with Bitcoin, and Bitcoin was supposed to be an answer to all this, right? I mean, Bitcoin was going to be this fair money that solved some of these problems, right? That gave us the freedom to exchange and to keep governments in check. And we find ourselves at a political impasse with regard to Bitcoin, where, well, we've got Bitcoin, got Bitcoin Cash, got Bitcoin Gold. Our man Willie Woo defined this initial fork offering. The IFO is the new ICO. Everybody seems to be forking Bitcoin and starting their own altcoins or vying for the actual brand of Bitcoin. And some people think that the brand of Bitcoin is up for grabs on November 16th when the SegWit 2x fork is supposed to happen.
Brand and user base. User base is even more important. To be the thing that connects to everyone's devices when they're doing their Bitcoins.
And so why is everybody in disagreement about the direction that Bitcoin should go? And I'd like to ask you guys, what do we need? What should Bitcoin be? And how should we decide which direction we go? Do we listen to Satoshi Nakamoto and his white paper from 2009? Do we get on Reddit and listen to all the trolls and the bullies and do we this is the Genesis block. This is the first block ever mined by Satoshi. And are you guys aware of what he put in the text section of the first transaction? January 3rd, 2009, Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks. So if you look at the original white paper, it's actually quite benign. It's like, hey guys, we need a digital cash system so that we can buy things on the internet. And it's very friendly. But in the very first block, there's kind of a political statement about, hey, we really need to check these bankers. They are causing humanity all kinds of woe, and we need a solution to this problem. And I think based on the fact that Satoshi Nakamoto remained anonymous and remains anonymous to this day, it's a revolutionary act. Yeah.
Federal Reserve is going to put these bankers in check. And everyone goes, oh, the Federal Reserve can be really good. Okay. Yeah, let's go with it. Now they study all the propaganda. Wow, this
Yeah, I think the Federal Reserve Act was sold as a screw the bankers piece of legislation. But it was just a rehash of this guy Aldrich had tried to push the same legislation through a year or two earlier. Well, I mean, the difference between 1913 and now, though, is I don't think all the people that were reading all those Hearst newspapers back in the day had access to the text of the bill itself. Now we've got a much more savvy population. Maybe not everybody, but certainly many, many more people are watching much more closely to what's going on. And Bitcoin and Bitcoin software is open source. I mean, it's completely transparent. And if someone were to say, Bitcoin is transparent, but if it really wasn't, then you'd know about it. And I would just put forward the hypothesis that it's different in that way. That, there's plenty of propaganda. I mean, everybody is spinning every which way right now with regard to what Bitcoin should be, what we need as a population from Bitcoin or Bitcoin successors. And, well, I hope that we're much more savvy this time around. But people are definitely spinning. What's that?
IMF is having an annual meeting
In Denpasar? When is that?
They just closed their DC meeting.
And their next meeting is in Denpasar.
But you look at the list of all the places that are meeting, it's like it's a weird coincidence. And the Freeport in Indonesia is in the IMF's back pocket.
Yeah.
So you got you can't go to I don't know. I'm doing the marketing for the meeting.
Oh, really?
Nice.
Your spot.
Next year. I have access.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be like marketing.
Can you get
What's going on, guys?
Can you get Christine Lagarde to come to our meeting on Tuesday night?
Can you introduce it? they meet where the security can be guaranteed.
Where their governments are, yeah, supportive of.
They support, they convene in places where the police fire horizontal points. There's always going to be lots of protests. They only convene in safe.
The last big protest was in 19. Maybe they're organized people here.
So, but you can get us 25 tickets or so, right?
Oh, guys, don't they give it?
Okay. That's news. What's that?
We're going to talk about segment 2X.
Well, yeah. Let's talk about let's talk about our own political problems. We've got Bitcoin, got Bitcoin Cash, got Bitcoin Gold, and now Segwit 2X. And we need to go through the different philosophies behind those coins and what they're going for, and can we debate which one is really representing what society really needs? And I thought we could start with the difference between Bitcoin itself and Bitcoin Cash. Manu and I have been having some friendly disagreements, per se, about the difference. And I have to say that I think my opinions about Bitcoin Cash are not my own opinions. I've been doing a bit of proxy opinionating.
What will the exchanges call each chain? Where will the mining power go? in my original understanding of Bitcoin, when I researched it in 2013, it was a balanced game theoretic system that managed incentives to form a stable growing system, in that more miners came on board to secure the network, thus increasing the strength of the network and the intrinsic value, thus driving the price up, thus driving more people into the network. And this created this this pattern to continue to incentivize more people to get on board and to make the network stronger. With the battle between the miners and the software developers, with the core developers, we're seeing consensus in the very high percentiles for 90–95% saying, yes, we want bigger blocks. The miners want to process more of your transactions. They want to be a better means of exchange. They want to enable the throughput to grow. And the developers are saying, we don't care about you guys, we're going to do it in a different way. So, and they're both saying, we're Bitcoin. We're Bitcoin, you're not Bitcoin. Okay, you fork off. No, you fork off. You know? So just, yeah, to be aware that this is a very different scenario. It's not just more airdrop free money. This is contentious fork. Because what, I mean, there's a lot of debate still on what actually makes Bitcoin valuable. And I would argue it's predominantly the user base. It's all the people that have understood the concept. It's an idea. All these millions of people that have understood the concept. They've got on board. They've got a bit of Bitcoin. They've had a good experience. They've told their friends, hey, this stuff can change the world. It can stop the banks everyone's mad with. You can use it in Ubud. You can use it anywhere in the world. It can't be inflated. The old use case of instant, almost free transactions. So whoever ends up controlling the user base will become the Bitcoin.
Also, which one has the longest chain? Now, Bitcoin Cash actually has the longer chain.
Yeah, which doesn't really, I mean, it doesn't mean anything much because they've put the replay protection in. So the chains are clearly different. They might, I mean, you could argue they could become Bitcoin if they started to have more value than Bitcoin. But I think they'll forever be Bitcoin Cash because Bitcoin is now forever tainted with segregated witness. There's no way to really remove that.
What is SegWit 2x going to give us that we don't already have now?
Nothing.
It gives you more throughput. Gives you more Bitcoin transactions. Doubles the base block size.
Right, but don't we have Bitcoin Cash to explore that scaling solution?
Bitcoin Cash doesn't even need the bigger blocks yet. The Bitcoin main chain is still full. It's still well,
but it is a on scaling solution, right? I mean, you've got bigger blocks already to explore that scalability solution with Bitcoin Cash. So what is SegWit 2x going to give us that doesn't exist in the world already?
It'll give all the users out there in the world that are using Bitcoin, vast majority of them have no idea that Bitcoin Cash even exists. It'll give them cheaper fees and faster transactions and start to repair some of the damage that's been done already in the last year and a half of Bitcoin being pretty much unusable for novice users.
But those problems have been addressed with segregated witness. I mean, I just looked today and it was 40 Satoshis per byte, and the bottleneck seems to have been alleviated.
I haven't looked at the size of the blocks in a while, but just the last few days I saw them. They're still the base block is still 100% full. And I also figured out how the subsidy works for you. Are you familiar with the block weight? How that's calculated? So block weight is what replaced block size in the new after segregated witness rolled out. This is how, we were talking about how does it subsidize? How does it make SegWit more? How does it make SegWit transactions cheaper for the miners, even if they're putting the same Satoshis per byte? The way it works is the old limit worked on, it's a 1 megabyte limit, that's the size of the block. But the new way is this block weight model, where the block...
This is going to go over the head of a lot of people.
You want to discuss that afterwards?
You want to hear? All right. Sorry. The block weight works, right? So the block weight says normal Bitcoin transaction space, which is still limited to 1 megabyte, has a weight of 3 times what the witness area is, right? And so the witness area can take up to 3 megabytes, but the base block can't grow, right? So your question the other day is, well, how is it a subsidy? How is it cheaper to put a segregated witness transaction through the network as opposed to a classic type 1 address normal Bitcoin transaction? The difference is when the miners are mining the node, and if they're running the core software, they can't exceed the block weight of 4 megabytes. So if you want to put the SegWit transaction in, you get this nice big 3 megabyte space that's subsidized at 3 times less than the main block area when calculating the block weight. You can put all your witness data in there, and so you can fit far more transactions into the block and get more fees. So basically, it creates an artificial incentive structure, which is what they're trying to do. They're trying to get everyone to migrate over to SegWit and make people stop using the old Bitcoin transaction model. But it's basically a network subsidy. It's central economic planning for pricing of how transactions are going to work, and with the intention of funneling everyone into segregated witness.
I thought segregated witness gave us a tiered approach to scaling, so that much like the internet itself is, you've got the physical layer and then the transport layer.
The tiering argument works as it fixes the malleability, which helps the second tier systems like Lightning to work. And we still have, no sign of Lightning being readily available for anyone to use in the immediate future. And yet the blocks are still big. And as long as these blocks are still full, as long as the blocks remain full, everyone will keep channeling into all the different altcoin spaces to do anything but a large transaction. It's probably it's one of the main reasons the altcoins have gone up so much this year, is because everyone's been having such a bad experience with Bitcoin transactions.
Right, but it's a function of the scaling problem, which these other coins have not encountered yet. Right. And if they reach anywhere near the hash rate or the adoption level that Bitcoin itself has reached, they will have the same problem.
I mean, a lot of them have had bigger blocks for a long time, like I think Monero, and I think even Litecoin have a bigger base block. I'm not sure. A lot of them have bigger base blocks already, and have done for a very long time. So, and it's been proven on the Bitcoin Cash network. They ran some tests, and they filled up the blocks to a full 8 megabytes. And everything just went through very, very cleanly, no problems. You look at the mempool in Bitcoin Cash, it always clears. It's always going to be one block and your payment goes through. It's just like Bitcoin worked in the old days.
So if we're always making bigger blocks, how do we move to a fee marketplace at some point down the road?
I don't think the fee marketplace, the whole objective was we achieve a fee marketplace by the time the block reward phase is out. As long as it's still a block reward, there's still enough economic incentive for miners to mine blocks. So all we have to do is achieve a fee marketplace within the next 100 years.
But if we just keep making bigger blocks for the next 100 years, and there comes a time when we have to say, okay, we're not going to make bigger blocks, is the economic incentive going to go away to mine Bitcoin? Because the block reward goes down and down and down, but we've got bigger and bigger blocks, which means we never hit the capacity level.
Well, it's basically saying, it's handing over. It's like instead of having a controlled economy where you say the maximum that you guys out there can process with your machines is 1 megabyte. Once you start to open that up, you let the miners choose. If the miners feel like, oh, this big bunch of spam transactions with very tiny fees are attached, not economically sensible for me to mine, I'm going to leave them in the mempool rather than place them in the next block. I think one of the really interesting arguments is to look at what defines centrality. If decentralization is one of our objectives, what constitutes centralization? And if you look at bigger blocks make a centralization in terms of those who need to run nodes. Okay, it makes
it harder to run a node.
Yeah, Mr. Raspberry Pi goes out the window, right? It starts to get harder. But if you look at, there's actually other types of centralization. For example, centralization on the control of software. Right now, mining, even if you went from, with the nodes, even if you went from several thousand nodes to half of that, that's still quite a decentralized pool. Look at how many people have the rights to update the source code for a Bitcoin node. That already is it. That's a handful of people. That's a centralization of power. That's a control on the governing rule set of the ecosystem. And then if you look at the core roadmap to move everything over to Lightning, well then how does the consensus work on the Lightning node? Who controls that consensus? Who controls that structure? That's opaque. Is there patents there or not? I don't know. You know. So once the beauty of Bitcoin, I mean, maybe I'm just being reminiscing on the old days, but you know, it's a system that was able to be understood, and more and more people were understanding the fundamentals of that system. Once people stopped using that system for the actual transactions and start to go on to all these other different systems, you start to have to, and the same applies to the old coins. It's a bit like what old York was saying at the meeting, not quite as radical as that. But you know, every time you look at another altcoin, you look at what controls the roadmap of that software architecture into the future. Bitcoin has no leader. It has no. It has multiple development teams, multiple development approaches going on. All the other altcoins, you're not seeing any level of competition with that, and they all usually have clearly defined leaders that can, you know, make a fiat, write it, and it shall be so.
Well, that's a bad thing for those alts, because those people can be co-opted.
That's right. That's right. So if they can be, people are always looking at, oh, the miners are centralized, the nodes have become centralized. Yeah, true. The centralization around the control of those that write the rules for the system, those that can understand the system, those that can write the code. This is actually a far more.
So who would you say has the most decentralized approach, and how are we going to get the most decentralized coin for ourselves? Because I agree that's the most important thing.
I think it has to be, well, if we look at the original incentive structure that set up the game theoretic balance system of Bitcoin with the users, miners, and nodes or software developers, it's having that balance. You know, it's a self-balancing system. They all keep one another in check, right? That was the idea.
And this is why we had 2 years of stalemate for Bitcoin itself.
Yeah, well, yeah, depends how deep you go down the rabbit hole on that one. But essentially, yes.
Right. I mean, I think that's probably, well, I would hold that that's why we've seen the spike in the price of Bitcoin, because we had that, we showed the world that Bitcoin is immutable and Bitcoin has a separation of powers. And as a consequence, there was all this fighting, and then finally we resolved our, you know, the world came up with their consensus view on how to scale Bitcoin. We overcame that problem and the price skyrocketed after that time. You know, resolving that problem, first proving that we couldn't change Bitcoin, and then overcoming that problem.
What do you mean proving we couldn't change Bitcoin?
Well, over 2 years we couldn't change it. We had no scalability.
Oh, yeah.
Right, people couldn't agree.
In that stalemate.
And then when we finally overcame that, there was all this probably pent up money waiting to see how we would resolve that, or if we would resolve it, and then it happened. And as a consequence, we also got. We have this environment of experimentation where Bitcoin Cash can test its solution in the marketplace. Bitcoin SegWit 2x can also, looks like, test themselves in the marketplace. And somehow, you know, if I have overseen or overlooked something in my backing of Bitcoin, I'll be proven wrong by the market, and the world will still get a solution that we all really love and want. I'm happy to be wrong. I mean, I'm certainly, you know, I don't know if anybody is smart enough to figure out what's going to happen, but at least we have this marketplace of solutions to draw on. And Bitcoin Cash has given us the on-chain scaling hypothesis, and nature is testing that hypothesis as we speak. We've got the SegWit hypothesis, and then every other altcoin that's out there is also saying, that there's not enough governance, there's not enough supply. The hashing algorithm it could be better. We're in this. I think I read, something like it's the Cambrian explosion of cryptocurrency, and we're going to get something that we like eventually.
Yeah, well, at the same time, you've got all the regulators breathing down your neck, and you've got all the other, you've got your established players trying to.
That's why we need something immutable and decentralized.
Squash the technology. Yeah.
That's the main thing, in my opinion. I mean, decentralization and immutability.
Yeah, but look at the ecosystem right now. Everyone's in exchanges. Everything's getting identity tagged. All the ICOs are identity tagged. Yeah. It's an attack. If you think we're looking at software attacks, blocks and bits and bytes. Look at the economic attacks, right? What's the most substantial economic attack you could do on the system? It's probably kill it as a means of exchange, turn it into a new gold, turn it into a new settlement. That is probably the most effective attack you could have right now, because where the strength comes from. If everyone adopts it, if it started to have a huge groundswell of adoption, everyone was using it for all the different things. That's where the security comes in. That's where the protection comes in. That's when it gets hard to ban and to nut out. It's just a fringe thing that no one's really using much, or a few people are holding as under their bed as a future investment. It's far easier to stamp out. Yeah.
I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. I mean, I don't think we can sacrifice, for the sake of scalability, we can't sacrifice decentralization. I think decentralization, unassailability, immutability, those are the most important things. If that leads to a settlement layer first, I'm okay with that.
A slow increasing in block size doesn't really mean centralization. It doesn't.
Well, I mean, how centralized is Bitcoin Cash? I mean, could the Chinese government shut down Bitcoin Cash right now?
You mean with an 8 megabyte block, it's still well within the realms of a cheap home computer and a basic modern internet connection. Have no problem running a node. Right? That's been the big argument. People won't be able to run nodes and it's going to make the network go down. It doesn't. It's easy. I ran a Bitcoin Cash node. I didn't even notice it was there. And especially if you enable pruning, you only ever have to store about 5 or 10 gigabytes. You look at the average internet speed in the world now, with all the broadband adoption. If you have pruning enabled, you've got an average CPU and RAM, and an average internet connection. You can run 8 megabyte blocks, no problem, no drama, right? You've done that a year ago, and Moore's law will continue. Did that a year ago, you wouldn't have all the new players in the market, all the new adopters going, what the hell? Where's my Bitcoin gone for 2 weeks? This is crap, It doesn't introduce crazy amounts and crazy levels of centralization. It would have massively helped means of exchange and overall adoption. I'm realizing this really late. This is what.
I'm later than you are. Yeah. But I think we agree that decentralization is the key. We don't want something that's centralized or co-opted. We don't want something that doesn't scale. For me, it's eventually. You think that it's more important right away, but I mean, this is something that we all want. I think we're going to get it. I mean, I think there's going to be some bumps in the roads. I mean, Indonesia can say Bitcoin is illegal. I see that. I think it's a long game. I mean, Bitcoin could shoot itself in the foot with segregated witness. Fine, at least we know. Bitcoin Cash might be the solution.
We'll get it, but what are we going to get here? What we wanted a new form of money.
Yeah, I mean,
we wanted cash.
Well, the
we
world,
don't want a settlement layer. We don't want a new form of gold.
If the world wants it, at least there's a pathway to it. I mean, it's a bit of a race to inform people about how all this stuff works. right? A lot of people are not even aware the way that central banking and the current monetary regime negatively affects their life, so they're not even pushing for these things. I mean, all of Indonesia shrugs their shoulders probably when the central bank says Bitcoin is illegal. Like, they don't care because it doesn't play a role in their lives yet. It's a race against time to educate people and to get what we want before it can be squashed by the perennial powers of the money creators. Yeah, well, they're not going to be using Bitcoin. Well, and Indonesia is largely a cash-based society. Even in a worldly place like Bali, half the places you go to, they want cash money for their rent. Your scooter guy wants cash.
84 million are unbanked.
Yeah, your little warung wants cash. I think Japan is also a cash-based society. It's I don't know. It remains to be seen.
We'll make a lot of comments.
We're kind of drawn to a close, but we're going to continue the conversation at Kismet tonight. We're going to head on over to Kismet. They're expecting us in about 15 minutes, so we can keep on talking.
One quick question.
Sure.
All right. 2 days ago, you posted on Bitcoins in Bali the rumor about Amazon possibly accepting Bitcoin as payment.
Did I post that? I don't think
somebody did. Does anyone have any further information about that happening, and any speculation about how that, even the rumor of that, may have contributed to rise in Bitcoin price?
You want a speculation on a rumor?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I want.
That's definitely.
I don't think it happened, but yeah, let's talk about it at dinner, and maybe next week we can go into more detail. All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for coming tonight, guys. We do this every Tuesday night, 5 p.m. at ubud.org. Check out the YouTube channel. Check out the Facebook group. And if you're in Bali, come join us in person. Thanks for coming tonight, guys, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for the telegram.
All right.
Actually, the rumor of it, if that happens, what's going to happen to it?